Hi, I'm Yaakov Katz, and welcome to a new episode of the Jewish People's Podcast by JPPI. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is in Washington today for what some people say is one of the most consequential, strategic, existential meetings that an Israeli prime minister has ever had with a U.S. president. The reason is because of Iran and what might happen there if the president's efforts to reach and broker and negotiate a new deal with the Iranians over their nuclear program fails. Will then America attack? Will Israel attack? Will America and Israel attack together? Or will a bad deal be reached? This is Netanyahu's potential way to try to influence those talks, to try to get the president on board for what might happen if those talks fail. But then there are those who say that this is actually one of the most inconsequential visits by an Israeli prime minister to Washington for a meeting with the president. And that, in fact, this is just about the trial, postponing it, for Netanyahu not have to take the stand. So what's really happening? And also, if we're already asking what's really happening, what's also happening in Gaza? Why is the offensive continuing on the ground, especially in light of that devastating report Friday night by the New York Times about an incident just a few weeks ago where Israeli soldiers, it seems, mistakenly shot and killed about 15 Palestinian medics in the Gaza Strip, some of who were clearly identifiable as medics and were driving ambulances that, as my guest says, were lit up like a Christmas tree. So my guest today on today's episode is Dr. Shira Efron. Shira is the Israel Policy Forum's research director, and she also serves as a special climate change advisor to Israel's Ministry of Defense. And she's the co-chair of the subgroup on regional cooperation of President Isaac Herzog's Climate Forum. Shira has spent over 15 years in U.S. think tanks, including the RAND Corporation, where she founded and led the Israel program. And she's been with the American Progress, the Center for American Progress, the Middle East Institute, and the Tel Aviv-based Institute for National Security Studies. Shira and I discuss Benjamin Netanyahu's visit to Donald Trump and what should we expect from it, but also what is the Israeli plan for Gaza, and if there isn't one, why is that? Have a listen. Shira Efron, it's great to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Yaakov, for having me on.
So we're talking just less than a day before Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu sits down once again with President Donald Trump in what some people are saying is really a consequential visit. Historic, even, I've heard some people describe it. This is the moment that Netanyahu might be discussing with President Trump what's going to happen with Iran. How is the United States and Israel going to maybe cooperate or collaborate in some sort of effort to finally, once and for all, end Iran's nuclear program? And then I have other people who say this is the most inconsequential visit by a prime minister to Washington. He was just there. What does he need to go for? And all this talk about tariffs, Turkey, maybe Iran. What's really happening is Benjamin Netanyahu was supposed to take the stand on Monday in the Tel Aviv District Court in the continuation of his trial, and he doesn't want to be there. He's been spending the last few days in Budapest, had a nice weekend there with his wife, and he just doesn't want to have to take the stand, and he got the court and the judges to agree to give him a leave of absence, a hallway pass, if you could call it that, so he doesn't have to be in court. What is it, Shira?
It's really hard to know what's really going on, right? This is a surprise visit. It was not planned. Now, we all, we have lots of experiences with Netanyahu visits throughout the years to Washington, right? And the recent visit, the first visit with the Trump administration, we were promised normalization with Saudi Arabia and solution to Iran, and none of that happened. So I tend to be more skeptical in the latter camp. It's unclear to me who initiated the visit. What we have here is a much bigger story than Israel, right? With the Trump celebrating Liberation Day of the United States, with tariffs that were calculated according to economists by ChatGPT and other algorithms without accounting for real unintended consequences. And, you know, all of us who have stocks portfolio probably are, following this issue on the personal level, but also on the professional level. And there are a lot of reports from Washington to say that actually Trump and his team were all of a sudden realized that maybe with being disruptive, which is what they want to do, they went a little bit too far, right? So what does Trump do, right? He just throws a bomb into the air, and now we're going to make all these other countries come to us and negotiate with us. Some will say beg us to change our decision. And in that regard, I'm not sure if it was Netanyahu initiating the visit and saying, I have to come to you to talk about the tariffs, which on Israel would be 17%, or it was Netanyahu, or it was, Trump saying, well, let's get someone to come here. And, Netanyahu it's very convenient to have Netanyahu come to Washington. And for both, I guess, actors, it's mutually very convenient for Israel to be the first state that comes and negotiates those tariffs. Now, so I'm putting Iran and Gaza aside.
So if I just, sorry to interrupt, but if I understand what you're saying, it's basically, if it is that second option, it's that Trump wants to get countries to come negotiate. Israel's a friend, so he can kind of wink at Bibi. Bibi comes, and that will set a precedent, and other countries will start to knock on the Oval Office door and come to negotiate as well, which is what Trump wants, essentially, is what you're saying.
Yes. Now, I don't know if this was Trump's thinking, or it was Netanyahu's people calling the White House and saying, we will come, we want to talk about this, and it's convenient. I'm halfway through. I'm in Europe anyway. Don't have to go back to Israel, plus other reasons. Another visit with Washington is always good. We can tie this to the Iran discussion, the Gaza war. So there are ample reasons. And I have to say, I don't want to be cynical about it. If Netanyahu is able to make Trump reduce those tariffs, and reports are that he's going to ask a reduction from 17% to 10%, this will have important implications for the Israeli economy at the time that needs it, because the tariffs, according to different calculations, could make between 18 to 26,000 workers in the Israeli economies lose their jobs over time. That kind of cost a lot of money to the Israeli economy. So there's real reason to sort of have this meeting just on professional ground that has to do only with economics. In addition to that, we're getting close to President Trump's ultimatum on Iran, right? May is sort of the critical month. We're in April. So this for sure is going to come up there, with Israel clearly having, or it seems like having, a preference toward military action, right? Combined military strike on Iranian nuclear facilities. And
what is, Shira, remind us, what is the date of that ultimatum that he gave? 2 months, right? Was that what Trump said originally?
It was 2 months, and it was in March. So it's going to be in May. Now, we've seen before, right? There was an ultimatum, hell to pay, on Hamas. There was an ultimatum if the hostages don't come back to noon. I don't take ultimatums, like the exact date. Right. I think is less relevant, but we are coming to what you would call the money time, right? Mm-hmm. And May is considered an important month in that. Now, so, what's going to happen with the ultimatum? Everything I'm hearing is that the Trump administration, they want negotiations. They want an agreement.
They want an agreement with Iran, and they're going to try to negotiate it. And it seems, by the way, that one of the people who might negotiate it will be Steve Witkoff, who until now has been put as, obviously the Middle East special envoy, but he's Trump's envoy to all big negotiations, whether it's with Hamas over a ceasefire hostage deal, whether it's Vladimir Putin over a ceasefire with Ukraine, and potentially also when it comes to a new nuclear deal. The question really that I think about when looking at Iran is, this is really the place that there could be great disagreement between Israel and Washington. The reason being, everything else, whether it's Hamas and Israel gets pushed into a corner, okay, Netanyahu can try to figure things out. Other issues, the tariffs, that's not going to be something that is viewed as existential. But Iran, for Netanyahu in particular, has always been the main issue for him. And if Trump is going to make a deal that, let's say hypothetically, won't be much better than the 2015 JCPOA, the nuclear deal that was reached by Barack Obama, what will Netanyahu do? So it may be what this is really also an effort, an attempt to influence those talks that are going to be taking place.
100%. And I think there is what you would call daylight between the Trump administration's approach to this deal, because they want a deal. And, Gaza, right at the beginning, it started well, but we've hit a deadlock. It's not going in a positive direction. He wants a foreign policy achievement. And on Iran, we have the Israeli maximalist position, right? Ron Dermer speaks about it as we want a Libya type of agreement, right? We want a total dismantling of the nuclear program. And there's no way Iran would accept it. Now, you hear people like Mike Waltz and some people in the more hawkish Trump circles also use this terminology. It does not seem to be the terminology of the isolationists, the MAGA folks, those who want an agreement. And Steve Witkoff, I have not met him personally. I'm hearing great things, but he's not sort of a Middle East, right, policy person. He comes to this and he's coming as a deal maker and he wants a deal. So I agree with you. And I think if that happens and there is a deal that does not address Israel's concerns, what will Netanyahu do? Go to Congress? Complain about Trump? We'll be left without tools here.
I was talking about this with some people the other day, and I'm curious your thoughts on this. And then I do want to go maybe a bit deeper into the contours of what the deal could potentially look like, because that was interesting what you said about Libya. But just before that, there's something to be said about the prime minister's relationship with Democrat presidents and Republican presidents, right? When Barack Obama was making the deal, Netanyahu knew to some extent that he could really push the boundaries and he could attack it and he could go to Congress and give the speech and do everything. But at the end of the day, Barack Obama, as we say in Hebrew, is not going to lishbor kelim, isn't going to break the kitchen dishes, or isn't going to, rip up and ruin, destroy the relationship, cut off Netanyahu's head, metaphorically. With Donald Trump, why, by the way? Because the Democrats are predictable at the end of the day, right? Donald Trump is so unpredictable that if Netanyahu were to launch an attack or offensive against a deal that him and Witkoff, let's say, made, that would not go over well with Donald Trump, and you can't know what to expect.
Right. I 100% agree. And I think this is Trump's main asset, right? Being so unpredictable. And that is the fear. Now, we have to admit here, there were people, especially, people in Israel who read Haaretz and other more leftist media that said, oh, Netanyahu is going to go to Washington. Trump is going to force him to end the war in Gaza and bring back the Palestinian Authority because he wants the Saudi deal and all. None of that happened. And we're seeing that the Trump administration for now is basically letting Israel, green light, backing Israel in its policies on Syria and in the West Bank and with the new ground. So here is where we don't know really this unpredictability for now. Netanyahu is sort of on the high horse and expects support from Trump. Until when? That is a question. And it kind of empties Netanyahu from his tools, right? What's the playbook? Can you go to Congress if Trump does something that is against? And here it's not just Netanyahu's, right? That Iran is sort of a religion. I think for all of us Israelis who are concerned about Iran, a bad deal just for the sake of a deal would not be a good outcome for Israel.
Right. So explain to us, Shira, what when you talk about the maximalist option, right, the Libya model, it's essentially the removal of all fissionable material, all enriched uranium. And we know that according to the IAEA, the Iranians already have enough uranium that's enriched to 60%, which is not yet military grade, but they have enough for several nuclear weapons if they were to decide to enrich that to HEU, to high enriched uranium. It would only take a matter of days, if at the most a couple of weeks. They still wouldn't have the weapons program, but that's a separate issue. But they have enough uranium. They got all the different facilities. Israel wants to see all of that removed, all the uranium, all the facilities shut down. Why would Iran agree to that?
They won't. As simple as that. They will not agree to this. It's not just the Ayatollah, and it's not just the I guess the traditional hardcore IRGC. They were not in Iran. The nuclear program is also part of a national pride issue. They will never agree to this. What we can do is at the best curtail this program and try to ensure that it remains or that it remains on track to be a civilian nuclear program, right? This is the best that we can do, and that's why I think the Israeli expectation is unrealistic. And when we set such high unrealistic expectations, we we don't work with what's the confinement of reality, and this is where. To me, we're either going to go to a showdown, right, with some sort of a strike on Iran that we can talk about if it's going to be limited or not limited. There's objective limitations of power, right, and what Israel can do alone and what it cannot do alone and where can you get. Or we're going to come to an agreement that is not going to satisfy Israel's maximalist demands. There's no other way in the middle.
Okay, so that's on Iran, and I guess we will see in the coming months or weeks, definitely, what exactly is going to play out there. But I tend to agree with you that Trump will prefer a deal over a war, and therefore we should expect some sort of compromise. So that actually would make sense that there's going to be some sort of talk between the prime minister and the president exactly about what that deal would look like. But if we shift gears for a moment, and go to the Gaza Strip, where unclear at the moment, right? What is this war? What is this new offensive out to achieve? And I'll just throw in there that the report on Friday night by the New York Times of what had happened with medics and ambulances back at the end of March, 15 or so medics who were killed. Israel at the time claiming there were no signs that they were actually medics, and video footage proving that the lights were flashing, reflective gear they were wearing. I mean, these were clearly people who looked like medics, whether they were also maybe some Hamas guys. They could not have known at that exact moment. But again, mistakes are happening. The world is condemning. There's calls for investigations. The IDF has admitted that mistakes were made in this incident, and we still don't really fully understand what is the IDF doing, right? Why are we still attacking here or there, pushing soldiers into different areas, pushing out of those different areas, new corridors, right? There was for since the beginning of the war, there was the Netzarim corridor. Now Netanyahu talks about some new corridor. I forget the name at the moment. What is the purpose?
So there's the stated purpose and there's the unstated purpose, right? A war that I think we as Israelis would agree that was sort of like a just war, right? We were attacked on October 7 in a way that, we can theoretically say Israel should have just returned the hostages that day, but there was no one in Israel that really thought Israel is not going to go to war. A war that started as Israel's most just war. I dare to say, even with Israel looking in the international community like Ukraine, right? And as a clear victim, and looking now, we're talking in April, so what we are 16 months afterwards, and it looks like the longest war in Israel's history without a clear cause for its continuation at the moment. Now, the stated goal, and it depends who you ask, right? The IDF says, the stated goal is just to bring back our hostages. And there's this repeated mantra that only military pressure will bring the hostages back, where in fact we know that the hostages came back in agreements. Most hostages, there were several that were rescued, but it wasn't military pressure. You can argue
a handful were rescued, correct?
A handful. But everyone else who came back came in an agreement that maybe the military pressure aided it. This is from the IDF. You hear the defense minister, Israel Katz, that many of us in Israel, we can mock him that is actually a politician, but in the world, he's Israel's defense minister, right? He says, we will advance and we will annex territory to Israel. which in some ears, this is registered as sort of, oh, this is going to be part of Israel's expanding borders, maybe for Jewish settlements. There's probably a middle line, right? The objective is that what had happened, Israel has not been able to dismantle Hamas. Hamas is a shell of what it used to be. It's not a military, terror military anymore, but Hamas still exists. And because we, the Israelis, we never agreed to think of a day after plan, a plan for after the war. At the end of the day, the military instrument has its limits. So what we're seeing is Hamas de facto being the strongest force in Gaza and the de facto govern. So this operation is meant, this continuation of the war that was paused with the second hostage agreement, is basically continuation of the effort to dismantle Hamas. Is it going to work? What is the purpose? How are you going to do it? Is it going to be more successful than last time? Who's going to take care of the
so that's the
population?
question, right? Like, Shira, why would it be different now as opposed to last time? Because as you and I have spoken in the past, and I think everyone even in the military recognizes this, and you do spend a lot of time talking to these people, is that you need a political resolution. The military campaign is not enough to change the reality. You can weaken, you can degrade, you can destroy Hamas infrastructure, you can kill more Hamas people, and then they replenish ranks, they rebuild infrastructure. I mean, you need someone on the ground to take the reins of Gaza and to stop Hamas from retaking control and governing the Gaza Strip. Where is that entity? Where is that plan?
So Israel refused to have a plan, right? The idea is that we need to annihilate our adversaries and then come up with a plan. Taking examples from World War II Germany and Japan, where in fact the context is very different. There are different plans of other actors, which I will get to in a moment. But this is where, and I think Yaakov, you'd agree, discussions in Israel have been so difficult to have, because if we want to talk about substance, I can argue without any right. We could talk about what's the military pressure going to do, and what do we do about Hamas and the Palestinian Authority capability, and whether it makes sense to, whether the UAE has an interest, but everything is so politicized. The fact is that we know that Netanyahu bringing an end to the war, right, and thinking of this other actor in Gaza are both highly politicized issues. It seems, and I say this with great sadness, that the prime minister does not want to end the war, because ending the war means that you can delay the trial further, right? That you can go to elections, you can have an inquiry of commission, national inquiry of commission. By the way, things that 70% of the Israeli public, left and right, want, right? But this is not what the prime minister wants. The second part, where it's highly politicized, is that, there are a lot of dreams, I think, around us about the Gaza Riviera and about private military contractors coming and taking Gaza, or the Saudis coming to control Gaza. But at the end of the day, Gaza is a Palestinian territory. And in some shape or form, the day after in Gaza is going to involve the Palestinian Authority, Israel's still coordinating partner in the West Bank. And that means some sort of political horizon and acknowledging Palestinian nationalism. And that thing just cannot fly with the current Israeli coalition. So here for you are two reasons why we're not stopping the war, and we are exerting pressure that's going to cost IDF lives. It's costing Palestinian lives. And probably more of these, ICC, ICJ, international criticism. This ambulance, I'm telling you, as someone who does speak with the military regularly, this is something I knew of in real time, that this is shady, that there were lights. We're Jewish here, but you saw the video. It's Christmas lights. There were lots of lights everywhere. The ambulance was crushed with the D9 and buried, supposedly, so animals don't come. Now animals can come eat pick on the human remains, but I didn't know they eat metal parts of cars. So this stinks, and more things like that will continue to happen if you have soldiers on the ground in Gaza with not a clear mission, and they don't have a clear mission at the moment.
I mean, a couple of things. One is, obviously we don't know 100% whether Netanyahu is continuing the war for political purposes or not, right? There's no way to definitely know that. I suspect that, you suspect that, lots of people do suspect that, and there's a lot of indications and evidence in that direction. What saddens me, to be honest, is that when he was indicted back now, when 2018, 2019, it just was, the writing was on the wall that we would find ourselves in a situation like this, not necessarily about Gaza, but that when you have a prime minister who's on trial, who's facing real risk to his personal freedom and definitely political survival, every decision that he's going to make is always going to be looked at in a suspect way. And that's just sad. I just say that like as a citizen of this country, it's just sad to me that that's the reality, because we don't know, and we're always going to suspect, and it's just not a healthy thing, I think, for a democracy and for people. But about the Gaza day after plan, I've spoken to people in government, and they do say, no, we have a plan. We have a plan. We just can't reveal the plan, because if we reveal the plan, it will ruin the chances of the plan happening. Now, that sounds nice. We don't see any indication of any type of plan. It was, private contractors, and it became deportation with Trump's Riviera. Now it's really unclear where any of this is going. And the truth also has to be said is that there's no one on the opposition within Israel that is presenting any alternative, really. I don't hear Naftali Bennett, who's everyone is crowning as the next prime minister, offer anything. Yair Lapid, Benny Gantz, they're pretty quiet on the issue. None of them are saying Palestinian Authority. None of them are saying, like what you said, that at the end, that's who our partner is. We should work with them. The only one who might be saying anything is Yair Golan, the head of the Democrat Party, the Democrat team. I mean, why is the opposition so quiet here? Why they have no original creative thoughts of their own?
This is your field. Fortunately for me, I don't analyze so much Israeli politics, right? But the idea is that when everyone is gearing for elections, right, and the talk is it's going to be elections, going to elections in some point in the fall, and then 2026 elections. And with the Israeli public going more to the right, everyone is trying to take votes from the right. So talking about the Palestinians as partners is just not going to be popular. I think it has failed, because if you're trying to be, you can't be more Bibi than Bibi, right? If people want to vote for the right, they will vote for the real thing. Why vote for the fake?
Right.
Right. And that's the part of this camp that I don't want to call it like peace camp or liberal camp or left wing camp, because, if we look at the policies of this government, and we haven't touched on like Qatar, and actually coordinating with the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, and a Bolshevik policy of subsidizing a whole sector, a big percentage of this economy. I don't know what's left and what's right anymore, right? The fact is that at the end of the day, we're not talking about colonizing Mars, it's Gaza. We all have a lot of experience in Gaza. I am very critical of the Palestinian Authority. I don't think they have the capacity at the moment. They can't control Jenin, so let alone they can't go into Gaza. But the fact is that Egypt and the United Arab Emirates, who don't like the PA at all, but they say, for us to come in and help you, we need an official invite. Official invite is not from a private military contractor, right? So everyone wants some symbolic PA presence, which if you pair it up with substantial Palestinian Authority reforms, which are needed, and pressure not just on Israel, also on them, maybe can get us out of this morass. But let's just think of the options. We have an option that is, status quo, right? Present trends continue, and what happens is, and I think it's the worst situation, we don't make a decision. Not making a decision is also making a decision, right? So we continue like this, and Hamas de facto remains. There's another option of full occupation and military rule. And some people will say it's not that bad. I actually think it's pretty bad. And, as a mother, I don't want my kids risking their lives in schools in Jabalia. And I also think we're unrealistic to assume that what we had before with, Europeans and other bankrolling our occupation is going to come back. And I just don't see this happening. And there's this other option of trying to go with the international community toward something that it's going to be very difficult, and it may not work. But I think out of the other three, we have three not ideal options. This is definitely not the worst. of the three. And it has real potentials because it doesn't only come with sort of Palestinian Authority as part of a, let's all call it like a committee that runs Gaza. And this is the Egyptian plan, the Emirati plan, there are other plans also, right? It comes also with goodies. It comes with the Saudi Arabia goodie, right? With normalization, with further integration, with hopefully reducing tensions on our borders with our neighbors. So it has additional advantages. And this door is open. We don't have to go to door number one to the continuing the war, door number two for the occupation. We can try something else. Why isn't the opposition saying anything? I'm not sure. Yair Lapid did come up with a plan to move Gaza to Egypt for 15 years of a lease, and then in exchange for money, and the Egyptians dismissed it. But why isn't the opposition saying anything about it, what Israel is doing in Syria? I mean, there's no criticism here about anything except for the prime minister's own doings.
And that just, takes us to the issue of how there's never really a policy discussion when it comes to these really important and difficult and complex issues. But Shira Efron, I want to thank you for joining us and shedding some light on it. And to all our viewers and listeners, thank you for joining us. You can find us as always on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google, and YouTube, and of course where podcasts can be found, and on the website of Times of Israel. We'll see you later this week with another episode.